all different kinds of things that go together, like pairs, right? But if we separate them, then they don't make very much sense. For instance, if I'm wearing AirPods right now in my ears, you would assume that those AirPods are connected to my what? My iPhone, right? Yeah, my AirPods are connected to my iPhone. But if I left my iPhone at home and I still had my AirPods in, that's kind of weird, right? Because AirPods without an iPhone they're meaningless. Or take it to the next level. If I'm wearing AirPods, but I don't even own an iPhone, you're gonna be really confused with me, right? Like, this dude, I don't think really understands what those things do, or he's trying to present some kind of image. I'm not really sure, because AirPods without an iPhone don't make any sense. They're useless. And we can unpack this principle a lot more if we want to gain understanding, to see how when certain things come together, we can actually understand both of those individual parts better, such as this. You cannot have appreciation without understanding. Can't have appreciation without understanding. Once you fully understand something, then you can really appreciate it. Let me give you an example. Let's say you go to the art museum and you look at this magnificent painting. Like, you might look at it and say, wow, that's really cool. I think that's nice. But once you start taking art classes and start painting yourself, now you're really going to appreciate that painting because you understand what it took to create it, right? Or you cannot have success without sacrifice. If you've had any success at anything, at any level, you know this to be true. You cannot have success without any kind of sacrifice. And what about day and night? What about day and night? Another good example. You can understand what daytime is because there's nighttime. Like, you understand what day is because of night. They go together. And we could come up with probably an endless amount of examples. There are things that they go together, but when they are separated, now we can't understand each individual part or what they do when they come together. We can't understand it. And this is true for people too. Like, you can know someone, but you won't know them completely unless you've got a full picture of them, right? I mean, you can know stuff about a person, but I would say you can't know somebody fully until you know them from all sides, where you have a complete picture of them. Like, Kelly knows me. She's my wife. She knows me. But then there are other people in my life that know me entirely too. Like, they know the good, the bad, and the ugly. They know my strengths. They know my stories. They know what I'm good at. They know what I'm bad at. They know my personality. They know my passions. They know my past. They know what I struggle with. They know my sense of humor. They know me because they know all of the attributes about me. Now, you could know some stuff about me. You already do. You know some stuff about me. But you can't fully know me, and you might have a misrepresentation of who I really am if you leave certain things out. Is that fair to say? That's what this story about Jesus can do. Like, right now we're in this series that we're walking through the Gospel of John. We're taking it season by season. Right now we're in season 1. And there's this question that kind of underlines everything that John does. Throughout his gospel, he's going to be answering this one simple question: who is Jesus? And the story that we're going to look at today, it's one of those that where maybe we don't understand it at first, or we've never thought about Jesus this way, we've never heard about this, we've never seen this, maybe we just want to ignore it, maybe we don't even like it because at first glance, this story doesn't feel like it's Jesus' character. At first glance, this story might make us feel a little bit uncomfortable, and maybe we just want to ignore it and not believe it. But here's the problem. If we ignore this part of Jesus, if we ignore this one today, or if we don't understand where it's coming from, then we run the risk of having a misrepresentation of who Jesus is, and we really don't know him. So here's the story. It's in John 2, starting in verse 13. It was nearly time for the Jewish Passover celebration, so Jesus went to Jerusalem. In the temple area, he saw merchants selling cattle and sheep and doves for sacrifices, and he also saw dealers at tables exchanging foreign money. So Jesus made a whip. He made a whip from some ropes and chased them out of the temple. He drove out the sheep and the cattle, scattered the money changers' coins all over the floor, and he turned over the tables. Then going over to the people who sold doves, he told them, "Get these things out of here. Stop turning my Father's house into a marketplace." I mean, that's pretty intense, right? And Jesus is getting mad. Is that okay? Like, is he supposed to get mad? And why is he getting so heated that he would go all Indiana Jones on some cattle, sheep, and people exchanging currency with a whip? Well, really, there's two main reasons why he's mad here. One is worship, the second is exploitation. Worship and exploitation. But some context will help here first. So this is Passover in Jerusalem. The Passover is the biggest of all the Jewish festivals. Big deal, big deal. Passover was to remember the time when God freed his people, when he saved his people from the last plague in Egypt, where every single firstborn was killed in every single family. What happened was that God said, if any of the Israelites, if you put blood of a lamb on a doorpost above your house and on the doorpost, the frames, if you put the blood of a lamb on your door, then God will pass over you and spare you. It's foreshadowing the cross. And then from that, God freed his people from the slavery of sin, or slavery in Egypt that they experienced for 400 years, which also was foreshadowing the cross, how Jesus would free us from slavery to sin by his death on the cross. Passover is a big deal. And most of the Jews around the world, not just the ones that are in Jerusalem and Israel at the time, most Jews from around the world would make their way to Jerusalem for Passover. So there are thousands and thousands and thousands of people there. And they wanted to go to the temple. They were going to the temple to worship. And if you came from a different part of the world, especially if it was any kind of distance, you weren't going to bring your own animal for sacrifice. Now, I don't have time to really unpack what that was, but that too was foreshadowing the cross, how Jesus would be the perfect and ultimate sacrifice. So what you would do is, since you didn't want to bring an animal all the way from your home because it was just too far to travel, well, you get to the temple, now you don't have an animal for sacrifice. You don't have an animal for worship. This is where the vendors come in. They start setting up shop in the temple. Wait, you don't have an animal for sacrifice? You've traveled a long way. Man, that's a long journey. Do your feet hurt? Don't worry about it. We got an animal right here for you, right here in the temple. We can sell this to you. How convenient is that? And maybe it started out, let's give them the benefit of the doubt. Maybe it started out as a convenient thing to do and a way to serve people. But it shifted. Because now all these animal vendors that have these stalls, these animal stalls set up in the temple, they've got an opportunity to take care of the supply and demand situation. Demand for an animal at sacrifice was at an all-time high at Passover in the temple, for sure. The demand does not get higher than it is right now. And these vendors are the only ones who have a supply. So you can see where this could go, right? They literally had the market cornered. They had a monopoly on animals. So what they did was they just started jacking up the price. They started charging ridiculous things because they could and they wanted to take advantage of people. Then on top of that, if you traveled, you've got all these people traveling from all over the world. They're bringing all different kinds of currencies to the temple. The problem with that was there was only one currency accepted at the temple. If you wanted to buy an animal for sacrifice, or if you were going to pay the temple tax was something that every male 25 years and older would have paid. And every year you'd pay this, and it was just for the maintenance and the upkeeping of the temple. If you wanted to pay that tax or buy an animal, you got to use the temple currency. So your currency from the US or Canada or Mexico or the Great Britain, none of that's good. You need the temple currency. No problem. This might be your problem, but it's somebody else's opportunity. This is where the money changers come in. So just like the vendors, they start jacking up the exchange rate. Crazy, crazy exchange rates because they could and because nobody really knew better. So really what's going on here is you got all these people coming to the temple to worship the most sacred and holy holiday of the Jewish calendar, and the most sacred place, and this sacred place is now turned into a shady farmer's market. That's what it is. It's exploitation. On top of that, what makes it even worse, and some scholars debate about this, but there is Jewish history that insinuates that some of the priests were actually in on this. So Jesus is mad. He's mad. There's this massive distraction to worship. I mean, these people are coming to the temple, the epicenter of worship, but it's going to be really hard to worship. I think you're going to be distracted if the place smells and sounds like the state fair. I mean, you got animals everywhere. They're making noise. They're smelling the place up. If they were in heat, that's awkward. I mean, it's not a great place for worship, not a great environment. Then you got money changers yelling over the top of everybody, trying to barter out a deal. This is not a great environment for worship. Then on top of that, you've got all these animal vendors. They put all the stalls in the court of the Gentiles. That was the outer court of the temple. It's the only place where a Gentile was allowed to go in the temple. A Gentile is a non-Jew. So that's you and me. The only place we could go in the temple. These animal vendors are pushing these people out. People that wanted to worship God, wanted to know him, wanted to be in his presence, traveled by foot from who knows how far, and now they're being pushed out of the only place where they can go to worship God so that they can be exploited. That's the second reason why he's mad. He's mad because people are being taken advantage of. And our God is a God of justice. So this isn't cool. Now, justice is talked about a lot today, and rightfully so. But we really need to understand what justice is from a biblical perspective. So the best way I can boil justice down, it's this. Justice is doing what's right in God's eyes. Not in the world's eyes, not in culture's eyes, maybe not even in our eyes at times. Justice is what's right in God's eyes. And there can be no justice at all apart from God because God's character defines what just is. So if you want to know what just is today, if you want to know what's unjust today, just look at God's character. And maybe even some of the things that we get upset about, we're going to do something about this. We're going to take care of this. This is wrong. This is unjust. Maybe, maybe not. And the things that we do, we're going to fix this. We're going to make it right ourselves. If it's detached from God's character, then it's not justice. What we're probably doing is either retaliation or vengeance. It's probably what it is. So Jesus is mad right here because this isn't unjust. He sees people trying to worship God, but they can't. He sees people trying to glorify God, but they're distracted. So he makes a whip. He starts flipping some tables. I mean, really, that's not anger necessarily. That's wrath. If you start flipping tables, I bet some of you wanted to flip some tables on Thursday night, didn't you? Just a minute, it's all right. Maybe you did. I don't know. It's a safe place. We'll talk about it later. Jesus right here, he's showing some anger. He's showing some wrath. How does that hit you? Because this is not how we usually think about Jesus. Usually the way we think about Jesus, we think about gentle Jesus. Soft-spoken, nice smile. He's wearing a white robe with a blue sash, probably singing everywhere he goes. Most of his dialogue is in musical form. He's got a little birdie sitting on his hand. He would never hold a whip in his hand. No way. Like, how does it hit you? Like, maybe Jesus is getting upset. Maybe Jesus is showing some wrath for you right now. You're like, oh, I haven't seen that or I haven't heard about that before. Honestly, Matt, I don't know how I feel about that. I don't know if I'm cool with that. I totally get that. But let me explain why you want this part of Jesus. Like, you want this. Because if we don't understand or if we ignore this part of Jesus, not only will we have an incomplete understanding of who he is, we'll have a misrepresentation of who he is. Because Jesus is not soft-spoken, white robe, feathery hair, that's all he is. No, that's not who he is. We'll have a misrepresentation of who he is, and at the same time, some of those attributes that we tend to focus on the most will become invalid if we don't understand this part of him. So maybe you're thinking, you know what, I can't believe in a God. I can't believe in a God or get behind a God that shows some anger. Or I can't believe in a God that shows some wrath. Or how can a loving God be angry or wrathful? Such a good question. That is such a good question. And maybe that's what you're wrestling with right now. Maybe you've wrestled with that in your past. Maybe you know someone who keeps asking you, how can a loving God show wrath? And my response to that would be, how can a loving God not be? So hear me out on this. Now, if I'm taking this position, if I'm taking the position that, man, I can't believe in or I can't get behind a God who has any kind of anger or wrath, that's just, I can't do that. I can't buy into that character. What I'm really doing is I'm rejecting a God that's not made in my own image. Man, I can't believe in a God that has that in his character because that's not what I would do if I were God. That's not how God should be. God should think how I think. God should act how I would in any given situation. God should feel what I feel. God should believe what I believe. What I'm really saying is that my perspective is greater than God's perspective. And my understanding of the universe is better than God's understanding of the universe and how things should be. What I'm doing is I'm trying to create a God in my own image. That creates problems. Now, if you would have asked me on April 4th, 2012, hey, Matt, could you be wrathful? First of all, I would have said, you're weird for asking me that. It's an awkward question. Second of all, I don't know. I've never thought about that question. I don't know. But if you would have asked me that exact same question on April 5th, 2012, Matt, can you be wrathful? My answer would have been absolutely yes. So why such a drastic change in 24 hours? Because on April 5th, my daughter was born. If someone messed with my daughter, that would incite my wrath as her father. You understand this. If somebody was messing with my daughter, if somebody was attacking my daughter, and I just stood here and watched and didn't do anything about it, if I didn't even have an emotional trigger from that, you would question a lot of things about me, wouldn't you? Bro, are you a coward? But the first thing you would question, if my daughter's being messed with, if she's being attacked, and I don't do anything about it, I don't even get upset about it, the first thing you would think is, Matt, do you even love her? You're not responding. You're not even getting upset. You're not doing anything about it. Do you even love her? So here's the truth. The source of my wrath with the love I have for my daughter is my love for my daughter. Love is the source of my wrath. How can wrath come? How can there be love if there's no wrath? If there's no wrath, then there cannot be genuine and real love. Love is the source of wrath. And if there is no wrath, then it's not really love. It's either, at best, it's a fake, shallow, weak, or soft love. And definitely it doesn't have any value because you're showing that it's not worth responding to whenever it's hurt, threatened, or exploited. Jesus showing wrath right here in the temple, Jesus' wrath came from his love. He loves people, so any kind of injustice or exploitation is going to incite his anger. So remember this. You got to remember this about Jesus. The same hand that held onto that whip took the nail. The very same hand that Jesus held onto that whip with, later on, he's going to take a nail. Real love and wrath, they actually go hand in hand. Because you can't have the nail without the whip. And you can't have the whip without the nail. Real love and wrath, they actually go hand in hand. They strengthen each other. They validate each other. So go back to that question. How can a loving God show wrath? How can a loving God not? Just like how I love my daughter and I want to fight for her and I want to protect her, the same thing is true for my sons. That's just a microcosm about how God feels about you. And the great news is he was willing to take a nail. That whip validated the nail he's going to take for you in the cross later on. So really, God's wrath validates his love. Real love, genuine love. Wrath proves that love's worth dying for. God's wrath, it validates truth. Wrath proves that God's truth is real and it's worth listening to. And wrath validates justice. It proves that justice is worth fighting for. I was in Africa years ago and was in one of the worst slums, not only in Africa, but in the world. And we were talking with different people, some leaders in that community, in the middle of these slums. And they were telling us about the horrific things that go on in those slums. Stuff I would like to tell you right now, but honestly, there are kids in here, I don't want to have that conversation without you being able to do that with them. Just think about the most awful things in the world, that and worse. I was nauseous listening to what they said was happening. Horrors, injustice of every kind. And I remember one of the women there said something, somehow the topic of God as love comes up, which is true. 1 John 4 talks about that in detail. But sometimes that gets thrown out way too much in Western culture. God is just a God of love. This woman said, I would never believe in a God that's just love. I would never believe in a God that isn't wrathful too. I said, okay, why? If God doesn't have any wrath, then this injustice is never going to be taken care of. I can't believe in a God that won't take care of this injustice. So Jesus is mad. If there's no anger, if there's no wrath whenever there's injustices or the truth is manipulated or lied about, or if love, real love is threatened, if there's no wrath, then that means that truth, justice, and love aren't worth it. And maybe this is a hard concept to wrestle with. Like, man, I just don't know. Like this whole idea of wrath and love going hand in hand. The whip and the nail were in the same hand. I don't know how I feel about that. Like I just don't know that I can believe in a God that would get angry. I just don't know that I could believe in a God that would have any kind of wrath. Or how can a loving God send someone to hell? Have you ever heard that statement before? Because that's usually the next step in this conversation. So maybe that's where you're at right now. So let me just hit on this one for just a second. First, God doesn't send anyone to hell. He doesn't send anyone. What he does is he gives individual people what they want. So Matt, are you saying that people want hell? No, not at all. What I'm saying is that if a person did not want God right now, why would God force that person to be in his presence for eternity? Like if I don't want Jesus right now, if I just want to reject him, if I want nothing to do with Christ, that's cool, religion, awesome, whatever, Christianity, that's nice, Jesus sounds great, but I don't need him, I'm gonna reject him, I'm gonna go my own way. Why would God force me to spend all of eternity with Jesus? First and foremost, hell is the absence of God. That is the worst part about it. Yes, there's torment there. Scripture unpacks that and lays that out, and it sounds awful. But the very worst part of hell is being eternally separated from the presence of God. Now, hell was not created for us. It was not created for mankind. It wasn't. It was created for Satan and his demons. The problem is, and unfortunately, all sin ultimately ends up in hell. The good news is that all righteousness, which comes only from Jesus, all righteousness ends up in the new heavens and the new earth. So now, if you want truth and love and justice to be real things, this is going to sound weird, but hear me out on this. If you want those things to be real, then you actually want hell to be real. Because what hell does, hell proves that God's truth is real and that it should be listened to. Hell proves that there is true love and it's worth dying for. Why else would Jesus die such a gruesome death on the cross, only other than to provide for you and tell you that he loves you that much that he wants to save you from hell? And hell means that the justice of God is real. And justice is going to take place. We talk about it all the time in our world. It's going to take place. It either took place on the cross, where all sin and brokenness was paid for, was made right, that's justice, or justice is going to take place in hell. It's coming one way or the other. God is a God of justice. Justice is coming. God's wrath will be satisfied. But here's the great news. God loves you so much. He loves me so much, more than we could ever understand, that he decided, I'm going to prove to you how much I love you by my son's death on the cross. The cross of Jesus Christ was the ultimate act of love and the ultimate act of wrath in the same moment. God's wrath was satisfied and his love was proven at the cross. That's Romans 5:8. Therefore, while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. Verse 9 then goes on and says this, Christ died for us, since therefore we have now been justified by his blood. There's the justice right there. Justified by the nail on the cross. Much more shall we be saved from the wrath of God, the whip. The hand that held the whip also took the nail. That's great news. And maybe it sounds great, like, man, that sounds cool, it's all great. But is there any proof of that? Yeah, there's proof. There's really good proof. People are asking Jesus to prove it all the time. The religious leaders were doing it when he was flipping tables. So some of the Jewish leaders demanded, hey, what are you doing? If God gave you the authority to do this, to flip tables, to chase people out of here, if God gave you the authority to do this, show us a miraculous sign to prove it. All right, Jesus replied, I love that. Destroy this temple, and in 3 days I will raise it up. Destroy this temple, 3 days I'm gonna raise it up. What? They exclaimed. It's taken us 46 years to build this temple, and you can rebuild it in 3 days? But when Jesus said this temple, he meant his own body. After he was raised from the dead, his disciples remember he had said this, and they believed both the scriptures and what Jesus had said. So how does Jesus have the authority to show and satisfy wrath? How does Jesus bring justice? How does Jesus prove that his display of love was real? The resurrection. That's the proof. That's the proof right there. Jesus rising from the dead proves that he's got the authority to get mad at sin and injustice. The resurrection, Jesus dying on the cross and then rising from the grave, proves that he's got the ability to make right sin and injustice and brokenness, that he's got the authority to make it right through the cross. So without the resurrection, Jesus flipping tables and making a whip, he's nothing more than an angry guy with a self-control problem. Like without the resurrection, the cross is the most disappointing and embarrassing end because now the cross is meaningless. Without the resurrection, hell is winning. It's winning. Without the resurrection, then you absolutely should question, how could a loving God be wrathful? Absolutely question that. But because the resurrection did happen, because it did happen, Jesus flipping tables with a whip proves and validates that his love for you, he's willing to fight for it and protect it. Because the resurrection did happen, the ultimate display of love had taken place on the cross, and the wrath of God was satisfied once and for all. And because the resurrection did happen, hell has no power over you if your faith is in Jesus as your Lord and Savior. It's got no power over you. So who is Jesus? He's the one who has the ability to and the authority to take the whip and the nail in the same hand. Because he took the whip, because he took the nail, those two things together, man, that should cause us to worship him. Honestly, we should be relieved. Now I know that justice is real. I know the truth is real. I know that there is real love because he held a whip and then he took a nail in it. Man, that should cause us to worship with passion. The kind of worship these people were distracted from. Our worship should be loud. It should be passionate. Who cares what you sound like? Because the way we worship reveals who we really think God is. Our God fought for you and died for you to show you how much he loves you and how much authority he has all over this brokenness. So let's worship him like that, all right?